Is it time that we pulled out of Somalia, Matt?
No, absolutely not. I don't think that withdrawing Kenyan troops from Amisom would make Kenya any safer, and it wouldn't make Somalia any safer.
Yes.
If Kenya were to withdraw, then Shabaab would simply be on Kenya's borders and continuing to stage incursions into Kenyan territory. It continues to plan attacks in all of the neighboring countries. And it's important to remember, Al-shabaab is not simply a Somali organization. It's a regional organization, it's a regional threat. It's operational in at least 6 countries of this region. It's attacked 5 of them with terrorist attacks. And so it's a problem that the region is going to have to deal with together. Could we refine the strategy? Could we do things differently and improve the way the war against Al-shabaab is being fought? Absolutely. But withdrawal, I don't think, is the way to go.
Withdrawal is not the way to go? Do you hold with this view, Dr. Paulos Machira?
Yes, I do. Burundi and Uganda can pull out. But for Kenya, we are just next, and we receive the brunt of hostilities from Somalia. So what I think we should know is this is a long war. Remember, in the 90s, we had the Americans there. We had United Nations Operation for Somalia 1 and 2. Then Operation Restore Hope. They did not succeed. So I think that's why they told Africans to resolve their own problems. When we are out there, I think Kenyans should generally know that when we are protecting our territory, we are not dancing in Somalia. We have gone there for protection, and we've gone there to protect Kenyans. So if we have a few people, I'm sorry to tell Kenyans, when we go to war, there is 10% casualty. People will not all come back. So if the 10% casualty goes, then we should not complain so much, because even parents, even myself, when my son goes to war, I know he has gone to war. He has not gone to dance. He may go and he may not come back. We should realize that. Then what we should do is the Kenyans should also be very alert. Remember, we were given for 33 billion last week by the US.
Yes.
We were given 12 fighter jets and 2 trainer crafts. But during the last week's attack on Friday, I am a neighbor to Laikipia Air Base. The attack happened at 5 a.m. in the morning. But the first and the last fighter jet left Nanyuki Air Base at 4 p.m.
At 4 p.m.?
4 p.m. That's when it left. So I don't know whether we had others in E3 here in Nairobi that left. But it's only one fighter jet that left at 4 p.m. I was there, a neighbor, and you know the sound of a fighter jet. So I was wondering, why did they take that wrong?
But
because the last one...
How do you know that was actually the fighter
you
jet
can
that
know,
is
you can know the
Somalia?
sound of a fighter jet if you are used to, military things. The way it screams, it scares everybody within the neighborhood.
All right, let's say from Captain Wanderi, you've been also with KDF. You know the sound of a fighter jet. Are you surprised that at 4 p.m. is when actually the fighter jet was leaving as an air rescue operation in Somalia?
You know, when we talk about there is a combat mission and a rescue mission.
Yes.
So I wouldn't really want to get into that, but because you may as well hear the sound of a jet fighter. But to answer Dr. Machira, and
maybe it's going for a running test,
yes,
for the maintenance at 4 p.m.
Yes.
You wouldn't really know.
If you have had an attack and you have casualties, what you said is a rescue mission. Casualty evacuation mission or rescue mission.
Yes.
But for combat mission, it means you are responding to a threat. But let's put this in perspective, Debarl.
Yes.
Debarl, so that people understand. KDF's incursion into Somalia was in October 2011. That was the first incursion. We're about 5 years, not 9. It's 5 years.
It's 5 years.
Yes. And that incursion was informed by what Kenya called hot pursuit of an enemy into foreign territory, which is allowed by the United Nations, certain treaties under the United Nations. 7 months after that, Kenya Defense Forces, and this needs to be clear, Kenya Defense Forces ended its Operation Leader Nchi. Operation Leader Nchi ended in July 6, 2012. And therefore the Kenyan forces rehearted to Amisom. And Amisom, there was approval by the AU Peace and Security Council in January I think 2012. In February 2012, the United Nations passed Resolution 2036, confirming Kenyan forces in Somalia or in an international mission. So first, we should not even be talking about withdrawal of Kenya Defense Forces. We should then be asking whether the entire African mission in Somalia should withdraw. That should be the question. The second question would be, if you are to withdraw an element of the Amisom forces, for example, you remove the Kenyan contingent, then you have a situation like we had recently in Sudan, where Kenya as a country made a decision after a disagreement with the United Nations, the then Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, after he carried out some actions, Kenya reacted by withdrawing its contingent from South Sudan. And now the United Nations Secretary General has had to request Kenya again to send its contingent, and they will have an appointment into a position which they did not get.
Yes.
So the question should be, and I want to agree with Matt, is it a question of a strategy or a question of withdrawal? And the question now is, if Kenya were to then signify that we want to withdraw our elements, our contingent from the AU mission, not the KDF, then you would have a replacement of an equally versatile and competent force from one of the African countries to replace the Kenya Defense Force elements from Amisom forces. And that has to be done sequentially. Now, because of one thing, when we had the first attack in El Ade, I made a comment somewhere that part of the problem was the rotation process and the replacement of forces. When you rotate forces from a battalion to a changeover, that is when Al-shabaab attacks. And why does that have a problem? It has a problem because of the logistical deployment issues, which are not handled by Kenya. They are handled by Amisom headquarters in Mogadishu.
Thank you.
And therefore there needs to be a re-examination of the strategy, not the kind of withdrawal we contemplate.
All right, so there is a question of the strategy. You say that they use not really the exit strategy. And also the question of, which one did you say again? Rotational as well.
And
of course, we'll come back to the rotational as well, because we can see maybe this was the wrong move that the KDF undertook with the rotational strategy as well. Let's hear from Dr. Mustafa.
Debarl, the question about KDF withdrawing from Somalia should be, are we talking about KDF withdrawing out of Amisom or Somalia? And
of course, that will be technically out of Somalia and Amisom as well.
It cannot be that Kenya actually withdraws now from Somalia. One is that this will send a very wrong signal to Al-shabaab that a few attacks and killing of the Kenyan soldiers in Somalia or targeting the camps where Kenyan soldiers are, Amisom camps.
They've indicated that, yes, if you pull out of Somalia, then we won't have this spate of attacks that we are having. That is the prime solution they want.
Well, that is debatable. What we need to understand is that terrorist groups like Al-shabaab compensates for their lack of military might. And this is not a conventional warfare. It is asymmetric warfare. And so the asymmetries of military might, which advantages Amisom, is something that Al-shabaab wants to compensate by information asymmetry. And that's why they take this kind of spectacular attacks very seriously, sucks in the media, and the media will be asking and following about the numbers, how many died, and that is immaterial in as far as the asymmetric warfare is concerned. What needs to be done actually now is the opposite, is that Amisom needs to have a surge in Somalia, so that they can control larger areas that Al-shabaab are occupying.
Right, but the effectiveness of Amisom also is questionable. Professor Noah Midamba, first of all, we've had also President Uhuru Kenyatta expressing frustration that Amisom is not fully funded. Amisom do not have good regular structures as well. In terms of funding, and from the African countries, they've been crying foul over this. Because if you lack funding, of course, also that will effectively going to affect also your operation and structures as well. What do you reckon,
Debarl,
Professor Noah
first of
Midamba?
all, our hearts and mind go to the fallen young men and women,
Yes.
who have gone at their prime age. I want to take a different tact on this issue, agree and disagree with my colleagues, and also in attempt to answer the question,
Yes.
whether or not we need to withdraw or not withdraw. There are several questions, and these are national questions that really need to be answered. What did our KDF planner learn from Elade attack
Yes.
a year ago? And Amisom or not Amisom, we talk about the national interest and territorial integrity of the country, Kenya.
Yes.
How strong was the defense? What information, if any, came through our KDF top brass combined with the Amisom? What were their response? Where was the reinforcement? How quickly was the standby unit ready to go? Mm-hmm. How many Kenyans died? How many enemies were eliminated? Mm-hmm. Why did it take hours for reinforcement to come, and almost 6 to more hours for air support system to arrive? We know by now that this attack happened at 5 o'clock.
Yes.
We know that the drone, which Kenya has right now, spotted 150 incoming suburb to attack our system. We know the KDF fire mortars on a tactical and made tactical retreat. We know that hours later, reinforcement came 18 kilometers away to join our forces. We know that Kulbiyow was manned by 15 KR battalion. We know that a day before an attack, or January 27th, commander had sent platoon of about 40 soldiers to scout the enemy. We know that at 6 o'clock, the drone noticed that there were more suburb coming. And we know that air power enforcement arrived almost 6 hours later. We also know that the Al-Ade attack came in waves. The first wave, second wave, and the third wave. So all these are unknown. Now let's deal with the question of withdraw or not withdraw. Mm-hmm. There is no simple and easy answer to Somalia's situation. We cannot maintain the status quo the way it is right now, nor can we afford to pull out of Somalia. Mm-hmm. What I want to recommend to the nation and also to the strategic planner is we need to make a tactical withdrawal. Kenyan forces need to make a tactical withdrawal to our border so we can reinforce our border. We need to declare 50-kilometer parallel a no-go zone for any armed group or anybody. We need to involve major intelligence within Somalia, and I'm coming to the last one.
Right. Can we leave it at that then? We'll hold on to that just so that we can hear about strategy, because you've raised a lot of issues.
I'm talking about strategy now.
Yeah,
okay, let me just finish. I have one or two more. We need to use drone 24 hours a day. And lastly, we need to build the military strategy and the police station all within the border and within the striking minutes of that striking point.
Thank you. You talk about rotational strategy, and I think, Captain Wanderi, you've raised this. And I want to ask you also, Matt, because you've done also an extensive study of the reinvention of Al-shabaab and their strategy as well. First of all, do you think that we remain none the wiser as a country that despite the fact that we had all the red flags raised before, we had also the propaganda video going forth, and we had people who are inside the video saying that it's not a matter of how, but when we will attack. And secondly, that was an intelligence enough, right, that they should be on the lookout. And then secondly, the fact that we had also some troops from Mombasa, they're saying with that rotational of the troops as well, could that have been, you know, the tripping wire for this particular attack in Kulbiyow?
Well, Debarl, I'd put things in perspective. It's, I mean, it is useful and it's necessary to re-examine a specific operation, a specific attack, what went wrong and the lessons we can learn from it. But first we need to recognize this is the fourth attack of its kind. It's not only Kenya that's been targeted. Burundi, Uganda, Ethiopia and Kenya twice have been attacked. I'm so sorry, the fifth attack of its kind. And soldiers are going to be killed. I mean, the intelligence, the tactical intelligence about Al-shabaab's preparations for that attack clearly could have been improved. Defenses should have been more robust. But the fact is that over the course of several years, as my friend said, we should expect casualties. Kenya, Amisom is fighting a war. Mm-hmm. Al-Shabaab's specific tactics, if we look at what happened, it's not just learning from El-Ade. Of these attacks that I've mentioned, there was one that was not successful because an alert sentry killed the first suicide bomber as he approached a camp in central Somalia. The vehicle blew up outside the camp. And Al-Shabaab, in the darkness, didn't seem to realize that the attempt to breach the perimeter had failed. So they attacked a well-defended position and they were driven off. The lessons to learn from that are perhaps better obstacles to prevent vehicles actually reaching the perimeter, ensuring, since all of these attacks happen at dawn, that there is really a stand-to at every base at first light to be prepared for these attacks. And the question of reinforcements, the fact is that Shabaab doesn't expect to fight for more than an hour. They don't bring enough ammunition, they can't sustain. 1 to 2 hours is the maximum that they can stage one of these operations. So it's very unlikely that once a position is attacked, there will be time to get reinforcements to the position. Shabaab will have either withdrawn or overrun and withdrawn. That's just, these are the tactics, techniques and procedures that we know the group uses.
But we know there were spoils also from the El-Ade attack as well. They went with most of the ammunition and the trucks. They were not just blown up as well. So in terms of capacity, you don't think they have the capacity?
I think Al-Shabaab have shown what their greatest strength is, their ability, they're mobile. They can concentrate forces very rapidly by surprise to attack a position. They use media very effectively. They film these attacks. They put together slick propaganda videos in the aftermath of these attacks. But again, stepping back and taking the longer perspective, if you look at where we were in 2007 when Amisom deployed, or 2010 when Kenya first became active, Somalia has changed a great deal. The situation on the ground is not the same. And there is progress.
Right. Thank you. Let us hear from Dr. Apollos Machira.
Let's remember that when we are dealing with...
Can you allow me to take callers, then we come to you, sir, if you don't lose your track of thought? We just
when we are dealing with Al-Shabaab, let's know that we are not dealing with normal people.
Thank you. Can we just take callers, then we'll come to you? Okay. Right. We have callers hanging on the line. We have Madenge and Robert as well. Let's just hear from our callers. Hello, good morning, Madenge.
Good morning, habari zenu.
Mzuri sana.
Okay, mimi nilikuwa nataka kuzungumza mambo ya KDF. Kwanza mimi nilikuwa nataka kuuliza mpaka sasa hivi wajua hatujaelewa kwa sababu hii vita imechange. Sasa nataka kuuliza swali. Hii vita iko Kenya ama iko Somali? Kwa sababu mimi naona kama sisi vita iko Kenya sasa. Hata si Somali. Kwa sababu ya kitu ya kwanza mpaka sasa ni Wakenya wangapi wamepoteza maisha yao wakati wa hii vita, mpaka na Wasomali wacha wanene Wakenya wangapi mpaka wanajeshi pamoja na hawa raia ambao si wanajeshi.
Okay.
Tukiangalia mambo ambayo yametukia, tukianzia kwanza Garissa University, tukienda Rihadi, tukienda Westgate, ni Wakenya wangapi? Tukihesabu ni wangapi pamoja na hao wanajeshi ambao tumekufa? Tukiangalia Somalia hakuna mtu anakufa, Kenya ndio tunakufa na hizi vita sio zetu.
Thank you, Madenge. Right, we have Robert as well hanging on the line. Good morning, Robert. Good morning, Robert.
Hello.
Yes, morning. You have a question or a contribution?
Contribution.
Please, very briefly, sir.
Mimi nauliza ni Wakenya wangapi ambao wamepoteza maisha yao huko Somalia?
Thank you. I think it's the same sentiment that also Madengi is asking. And also we have Romeo Castro on Twitter asking the same questions. He's saying that the doctors speaking of 10% deaths so casually, if that's how this administration thinks, I pity our men and women in Somalia, right? So you say it's a given, and of course there has been question on the casualties as well, that it's a given that 10%, as you put it militarily, casualties are bound to be there. This is the nature of war, we cannot help it. But in terms of the government being cagey with the information on casualties of the soldiers, and people are saying they're just giving conservative figures, what do you make of that? Because from LRD as well, we've not been told about also the soldiers that were captured as well.
I think this is an international intelligence cache. We also don't know how many US citizens died in Iraq during the war in Iraq. I think it's not good to give real figures because we are dealing with the international terrorism. For now, Al-shabaab, these guys are ready to die. So that is the surprising bit of it. But my problem is it was generally known by the intelligence sources from the senior military officers that on 16th of this month, they will do a repeat of Al-Daida. So they only stayed 4 days before they went. They were very ready, and the information was known. What the problem is, why they were not prepared, long enough. Because we know at between 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. they were supposed to attack that week. So they attacked on 20th. So what we should do, in my opinion, is to know that they will attack every year, every time, and these people are ready to die. And when they are ready to die, it's very, very difficult to, to try to defend yourself when suicide bombers are there.
All right.
And then the Kenya, Mathenge, I'm telling you, the Kenya government's priority is to protect ourselves. Whether we shall be protected in Somaliland or in Kenya, that is the responsibility for our country to protect us. So if they have to go to that length, so be it.
All right, so be it. Captain Wanderi.
Yeah, first, it is always a sad thing to lose a comrade in arms because you're talking of somebody who's gone through intensive training. But Matt talked about the strategy. Yes, the Burundian contingent, the Ugandan contingent, and the Kenyan coordinate now twice has been attacked in the same method, using the same method by Al-shabaab. Let me state this position that when you're doing what is called a rotation and a changeover of a battalion or a combat element group, what happens is that you have a camping or various companies in a place, and all you will have is a battalion changeover, that a contingent is replaced by another. Now remember that the contingent that is getting out has its own handover note. It is the one that has been in that place. It is the one that has collected the basic intelligence. It is the one that knows the grounds of tactical importance in that area. But this has been a problem of Amisom. It's not a Kenya Defense Forces problem.
Yes.
It is a problem of Amisom, that Amisom wants a replacement of the entire contingent at once.
It is Amisom.
It is Amisom, and even.
But why can't we raise questions about that?
It's because of the funding and the way the forces operating under the UN habit, operate, and it has also happened in other countries, where they want, because there are issues to do with medical cover for the people moving in, the issues to do with their insurance when they are moving in. So they want a mission to end at a certain point, then another one, and a contingent comes in, and the entire group, the fighting elements are replaced.
It seems Kenya then is really bearing the brunt of this.
Not just Kenya.
Yes.
In fact, it's only that people have said that there are no figures given. Remember, when you die in an international mission, in an international war, and you attach to a body like the UN mission or Amisom, the inquiry as to how many people have died and the way they should be compensated is not even a responsibility of Kenya. It is a responsibility of the mission command, of that mission command. It is the one that bears responsibility. Those are some of the things perhaps the state needs to be explained explicitly to Kenyans. That it is Amisom that then will say this number of people passed on, or we lost this number of troops, and this is the compensation we are giving. Because remember, they've gone there on a mission under Amisom, which is backed by the United Nations. So those are the kind of things that needs to be renegotiated, not just at the level of Kenya or KDF, but at the level of the entire region and perhaps the African states. Perhaps it would have been made more sense for African states, in the presence of the UN Secretary General in Addis Ababa recently, to discuss the entire mission in Sudan, North Sudan and Somalia.
But don't you find it also a bit consternating that the fact that we had all this, and we had Peace Summit, we've heard from the Peace Summit, the chair here speaking this morning on that clip that we had at Smail, and he didn't even mention about the attack in Somalia so far. Do you think, Dr. Mustafa, we need to go back to the negotiating table, as he says, and talk about this? Because as far as we're concerned, it is Kenya who's bearing the brunt of this, and Amisom is remaining very mealy-mouthed about this. Very briefly. Yeah,
in terms of strategy and looking at the overall performance and equipping of the Amisom forces in Somalia, yes, we need to go back to the drawing boards. Amisom is one of the least funded military missions in the world. You have roughly 20,000, 22,000, is it? 22,000 soldiers, troops, boots on the ground. If you look at similar situations in Afghanistan, where you have 150,000 when there was a surge in Afghanistan, in Iraq there were over 100,000 troops in Iraq trying to contain Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and you compare that to 22,000 in Somalia, that's a very small number. Now, coupled with equipment that is provided to the Amisom contingent in Somalia, the EU and the international partners are the ones who have been funding part of the cost to execute this war. And the EU has been on and off trying to support the Amisom. We saw Burundians threatening or actually pulling out of Somalia. And when we look at this kind of war, it's a global war against terrorism. It's not just that the African forces are supposed to fund everything in Somalia. Right. And the second point here that I think we should talk about is politicizing military issues at a time of war like this. And this is something that I think our political leaders need to be very careful about, politicizing the issue of Amisom and KDF in Somalia, especially during this time of campaigns.
Interesting, of course, and I want to pick one or two tweets before we come to you, Professor. We have Tom Clement Ombija saying, Kenya didn't learn its deficiencies in strategy, tactics, and overall understanding of Somali dynamics as a whole. Also, Blemwell Njuriri is talking about politicizing also this particular issue. He says Al-shabaab has also demonstrated ability to use the so-called Kenya opposition politicians as political wing for its propaganda. Of course, this is not our view, but the view of Blemwell Njururi as well. You talk of politicizing this. But let's come to the issue of funding. And Donald Trump, we were on this panel and we discussed about the Donald Trump questionnaire on what effective use their money is in fighting Al-shabaab. He was questioning, why should we sink a lot of money, yet we are not winning this war with Al-shabaab? Is that also a valid question that we should be asking ourselves? Why are we having our soldiers in Somalia and we don't seem to be winning this particular war?
Debarl, yes, that's a valid question, and others that people are
I want you to answer that one, sir.
Raising. We are in Somalia not to make Somalia government work. That is the issue for Somalia to solve. There was only one time, there was only a very brief time when Somalia worked as a government. Somalis never work as a government. The US tried, they pull out. All others tried and pull out. And the funding that Europeans are providing and Americans are providing is a very sensitive issue because they can pull out any time. The question is, where does the Kenyan national interest lies? And I'm submitting right now that Kenya government need to have a strategy, a two-pronged strategy. One is to clean up within ourselves, within Kenya itself, because the Al-shabaab are intelligent right among us within Kenya. They're recruiting within Kenya. Who is aiding and abetting this kind of activities in the country? Secondly, to buffer our border. Israel border is buffered. Nobody can penetrate into Israel. Jordanian border is buffered. That is where our interest lies, and that is where we need to spend the meager resources that we have in the country.
All right. Okay, we were remaining with around 15 minutes, and I want us to also delve deeper in terms of interests, right? But before we go there, you had to say something, Captain Wanderi, very briefly. Yeah, we go to now the issue that were raised by Journalists for Justice as well, and we know this particular report that came forth, I think, in 2015.
You know, I want to deal with one issue which relates to the way Al-shabaab is metamorphosing, and that's why all forces and countries that have gone into Somalia have found it very difficult to deal with them. The leadership of Al-shabaab and even the recruitment strategy relates on the clan system. Clan is at the center of political and social relations in Somalia. And right now, if you look at the areas where Al-shabaab is very active, is it central Somalia, which is Bay and Bako regions, yes, occupied by the Rahwen community known as Digil and Mirifle, Middle Juba and Lower Shabelle. That is where the community feels is very strong. That is the Digil and Mirifle community. The Hawiye, the Darod are on the other side, and their sub-clans. But why has this happened? It's because of the political structure in Somalia. There has been lingering questions on political representations and the legitimacy of the political leadership in Somalia. Currently, you have a situation where the big clans, the Hawiye and the Darod, plus other smaller clans, share the centrist power in Mogadishu. But you have the most powerful person from the community I've mentioned operating in those areas being the speaker of the assembly in Somalia. Okay. And therefore, as much as Amisom and troop contributing countries are talking about using a military solution, they must also talk to the political leadership in Somalia to find a way to accommodate everybody, because any time a clan feels left out of the power in Somalia, what they do is join the terrorist group.
Which is very ticklish, Matt, by the way, because first of all, you're saying you talk to the political class in Somalia. We understand that the Somali government also has been against KDF being in Somalia for the longest time. They're saying they've overstayed and this can turn out to be a military occupation. You've done also intensive study on the clanism within Al-shabaab, Matt. Could you kindly tell us, first of all, yes, if we don't have maybe the blessings of the Somali government, and we know this is arising from the frosty relationship that is arising between the buffer zone, which is the Juba land, with Madobe as the president, and of course this is with the aid of Kenya and the Somali government, first of all. Do you think, first of all, we have the blessing of the government, if we may start from there, that we be in Somalia?
Absolutely. The Somali government might not even exist were it not for the presence of Amisom troops in Mogadishu.
But the parliamentarians have said that they don't wish this KDF to be in Somalia.
There are certainly difficulties in a peace support operation where the troops are mainly from neighboring countries. And in Somalia, this is very unusual. We have Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti. And the bilateral relations they interfere with the functioning of what's a multilateral peace support operation. But the government needs Amisom. All the governments need Amisom. Somalia is becoming a federal state. And I think Amisom has probably done almost as much as it can expect to do. It has provided space for the growth of the federal member states in Somalia. Jubaland is where the Kenyan contingent is operating. And these governments are making progress. They're developing their own forces. Amisom cannot defeat Al-shabaab on its own. This is going to be a Somali fight. And so I think the strategy needs to involve the transfer of responsibility over time from African Union troops to Somali forces. And that strategy is being rethought. There is a group called the S6, the major security contributors to Somalia, are looking at complete review of how to support the Somali security forces, much more sensitive to the political and clan issues that my friend has raised. This will obviously have to have the blessing of the government, but it will also need to be very closely coordinated with the troop contributing countries of Amisom. We can't have the building of the Somali forces divorced from Amisom, because this is going to be a continuum. As Amisom draws down, Somali forces take over the responsibility. And I think the government recognizes that. The next government will recognize that. This is going to be several more years before we see Somalis able to take over the prime responsibility for this fight.
All right, can we move on to the black and white, because we're remaining with 10, and then we come to you, Dr. Apollos Machira. This has been the report also from the Journalists for Justice, and I might just show you the cover of it. There you go, where you can see the black and white. Kenya's criminal racket in Somalia, Justice for Journalists, they came up with this particular report, and they're questioning, of course, the existence of KDF in Somalia. I will endeavor also to read just a snippet of it. But first of all, do you think that we will stay there because their interest, when we had this allegation of which KDF stoutly denied, that there's charcoal smuggling business that is going there, also contraband sugar as well in Somalia. Dr. Apollos Machira.
First, I wouldn't want to go there, that they are doing other business. They've gone there as military soldiers, and they are professionals.
But just listen to what the report says before you say you don't want to go there, just, right? Because here we're talking about the sugar smuggling. This is from the report itself. And it says that sources from within KDF, Parliament and foreign embassies all described to JFJ, that is a Journalist for Justice, a situation in which a high-ranking military official is at the head of a smuggling network, which includes commanders of KDF forces within Amisom, key figures in the ministries of defense, immigration and state house, and that this network enjoys the protection and tacit or cooperation of leaders at the highest echelons of executive and National Assembly.
I think that is the budget economy Chief Justice Mutuga was talking about. That's why we have sugar coming through Northeast and being escorted by some of those defense officers. And that's why we are failing. But the actual thing...
The objective of this war is divided.
It's a mixture of misfortunes.
All right. Okay.
But my worry is, on Saturday, I'll be attending a funeral for one of the KDF soldiers who was killed in Kulbiyow.
Kulbiyow.
Yeah, Kulbiyow. And I know what will happen because I also attended another one for Al-Daida. He will come in a coffin. I think that in a coffin is not a casket, because we won't be allowed to see anything. They will come, they will do their military things, they will promise things, but nothing will ever happen. There is no compensation for the traumatized parents, because even Al-Daida, they were promised that the government will come, they will compensate them, but they disappeared and they have never come back. So even the people, the parents in Nyari, because most of these soldiers were from Nyari, the parents are going to suffer because we do not care. We are not humane at all when the KDF soldier dies in combat.
Thank you. Let's go back to the issue of smuggling. And Captain Wanderi, you've been in the forces. Is this business
Let me say this,
operative in the forces?
that the question of smuggling in the entire northeastern Kenya region is not just a matter that should now concern just the military. It's a matter that should concern our entire country for this reason. We share a very long border with Somalia. You also need to understand that the clan and the people across the borders, I have served there, and the first thing they tell you is that the people are one. The religion is one. The soil is one. The language is one. So how do you distinguish across the borders who belongs to which side and who cooperates with which clan? Now, remember, as you go across Kenya, a clan will straddle either Ethiopia and Kenya, Somalia and Kenya, or Kenya and Somalia. And that is the trouble we have here. That definitely, for a very long time, there have been accusations and now counter-accusations. And I remember when the former commissioner of police, the Major General retired Ali, took power, took over the command of the Kenya Police Service, he did one thing, and it really affected a lot of people, and some people went to court. He actually demoted from command and actually dismissed a lot of senior police officers who were then in charge of police divisions in northern Kenya and along the border, because he said they were involved in smuggling. And this is a question we need to ask ourselves, as seriously as citizens. We have had for a very long time people even leaving Somalia and coming to Kenya, to the extent that the elements, the moment again you remember you cross the frontier into Kenya, you stop being the responsibility of any military force. You become the responsibility of the internal security force, which is the Kenya Police Services, the twin police services. We have had situations where there have been counter accusations against the security and defense forces, to the extent that if you go now along the road between Mwingi, Ukasi, all the way to Garissa, you have certain roadblocks now manned by the military, because there was mistrust as to whether the police force itself was really checking the things that are coming in. And coupled with that, with the high levels of police remaining in the Transparency International in Kenya as the most corrupt institution, then that puts a very dicey situation. So
it goes back to
yes,
back to actually what we're talking about, corruption and security.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from Dr. Mustafa, also as we're preparing our winding thoughts on this. What is the way forward then?
Yeah, Debarl, wars are messy. There's no clean war, and smuggling, all kinds of contraband actually do happen. And the institutions that do investigate this kind of behavior ought to do a good job and give very objective reporting. I remember, I think the United Nations monitoring group also did do a report some times back, and a part of that report noted that Najib Balala and Ambassador Amina were funding Al-shabaab because they did some harambe to a mosque here in Isli. And when UN reports put forward very wild allegations, then one has reason to question some of the reports that are coming out. And this is something that is important to note. There might be some truths in the reports that are coming out. And some of the issues that we are dealing with, smuggling, have been there for a very long time. And in a case like this, where there is ongoing war, then we actually expect that smuggling is going to increase. But the point here, Debarl, is that Matt alluded to this, is that this war is going to be very difficult to be won on account of military might alone.
Thank you. On your closing statement as well, Noah Midamba.
Debarl, we have to secure Kenya border. We cannot easily stop corruption. We have to declare 50 miles parameter around Kenya a no-go zone. We need to rethink about people who are securing our border, well-trained, well-disciplined, and we need to be able to deny those people, whether they're under armed forces or citizens, who are selling and trading and abetting corruption.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Bryden.
There is going to be a Somali electoral process this month. A new president and a new government will come into place. They will have 4 years to continue building the institutions of their government. I think for Kenya, for Amisom, for the international community, the message to the incoming government needs to be, we're not going to stay indefinitely. You've got 4 years, but by the end of those 4 years, we want to see the responsibility transferred to you. So focus on those tasks, get them done.
Thank you. Dr. Apollos Machira, 30 seconds.
The government and the UN should compensate KDF soldiers who die in combat.
Thank you. Captain Wanderi.
Yeah, a quick one. The business of soldiers is war, and war is the business of soldiers. And they're about to be casualties in any war and in any conflict. My request is to the people of the Republic of Kenya, the political class and the civil society. Please, for heaven's sake, do not demotivate and demoralize our security and defense forces in the name of adopting all manner of criticism when you do not have the facts. Because anybody who has not been in the line of combat, like some of us have been, then you would not understand what happens on the front line.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Mustafa, briefly.
More resourcing, Debarl, for the missions that we have in Somalia, and a more focus on ideological pushback on Al-Shabaab.
Thank you.